Hi everyone, welcome back to Coaching Coins. Today I will have a student, Jennifer, who's going to talk about her experience with IPPE preparation or that she's gone through, and then she's currently preparing for APPE, so it'll be a fun topic for students out there. With no further ado, Jennifer, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Dela Pena. I'm a P3 student at the University of Houston College of Pharmacy. I just finished my hospital IPPE rotations. I'm about to start my rotations, my APPE rotations in May, actually. That's exciting.
Yes, and she's very excited to start her rotations. So just walk us through for those that don't know what's IPPE rotation, what is IPPE rotation and what's the process for that?
Yeah, so at the University of Houston College of Pharmacy, you start your IPPE rotations your first year. For us, we started our community IPPE rotations where we had an introduction to pharmacy practice in the community setting. And that's just a way for you to experience and I guess shadow a pharmacist in the field. So over the summer, I was able to shadow a pharmacist at Randall's, and recently in January, I was able to shadow a pharmacist at HCA Kingwood Hospital, and that was my IPPE and my institutional hospital rotation.
Yeah, and for IPPE rotation, it tends to be more in the what would I call it? Hospital or community, or hospital and community. And you have to have at least, I think it varies between various schools. Some would do the whole way, which is a whole 4 weeks in the summer. Some will break it up, like once a week for in the whole semester. So it varies across from various colleges. But the whole goal of IPPE is just really allow students to immerse in the environment that they would be in for APPE rotation. So what are some challenges that you encounter when you are in your IPPE rotation, and what are some 3 things that you learn from there?
So the biggest challenges I encountered in my IPPE rotation was probably understanding how to answer the questions that they had to ask, because going into my IPPE rotations, I wasn't sure how to respond to a lot of the things that I was being asked. I felt like I didn't understand a lot about the hospital system, and so they were questioning me about like different cases of patients and different things or systems in the hospital and ways to be more efficient in the hospital, and I didn't know how to respond. And I thought right there and then I had to have the answer. I had to have like the best answer for them. But really, I think more than anything, it just taught me how to have a conversation with I guess the higher ups or even pharmacists, and learn how to respond and learn how to think through problems, because it was the first time actually doing something in practice versus being in school and having a book answer rather than an answer that you would have to work with the pharmacy team, or I guess your pharmacist or your preceptor, to find an answer with. And that was probably the biggest thing I had to get used to when I went into my IPPE rotation. And besides that, I had 2 other, I guess, things I had to overcome, because that was one of my biggest issues. 2 other things, I think the first thing was the hospital, getting used to the hospital system, because I haven't worked in a hospital before. So understanding the workflow, but I think that was more exciting for me more than anything, because I got to see how everyone within the hospital interacted and how pharmacists treated the nursing staff, or how physicians treated pharmacists. That was really cool to see. And another, I guess, challenge I had to overcome was, besides knowing the information, is studying all the information. So I would keep a notebook on hand, and I would write any questions I had. And I wasn't really sure whether or not to ask the question to my pharmacist or to look the questions up myself. So with that, I think for the first few days, I started looking up the questions by myself. But when I couldn't find the answer, I would talk to the pharmacist, until finally my pharmacist said, "Hey, you're allowed to ask me questions." So I think figuring out how to ask questions and find the right balance is something I was having a lot of trouble working on.
And I mean, that's just a introduction to rotations, right? Because when you're on your APPE rotation, you're expected to know some information already, and there will be questions that you will not know, and that's where topic discussion and journal club and just where your preceptor can provide those insights. Can you share what's your day-to-day function as an IPPE student in the hospital versus community?
Yeah, so in the community, I mostly did a few things that I would basically work as a technician, would work in a community setting, so like a CVS or a Walgreens and a Randall's. But because I was an intern, I had a few like pharmacist responsibilities. So I was able to call the doctor and get refills, or I was able to take prescriptions or transfer prescriptions. And then I was also able to help the pharmacist with like control orders, or help with MTMs, or help with counseling patients. And that's things I wasn't able to do as a technician. So that was my day-to-day life in the community setting. In the hospital setting, it was institutional, but my hospital let me, I guess, delve into the hospital delve into like the ICU and the emergency room versus just only staying in the central hospital. So on the days I was in the central in the central pharmacy, they had a schedule for me, and I was responsible for working with the technicians and working through each shift. So they had about like 5 or 6 technicians each day and 5 or 6 pharmacists. And each day I would shadow each different pharmacist in the central pharmacy to see what their role was and their responsibilities. And it was mostly just shadowing the pharmacists to see what they did. And with the technicians, I was able to scan prescriptions like technicians were able to do, because they let me do that. But as a pharmacist, I didn't have that much responsibility as a B student.
Okay. Yeah, so in the hospital, it's a little bit more stringent in terms of the amount of flexibility you work as a intern under IPPE. But I think the biggest difference, and I have students who do an IPPE, is really introduction, right, towards hospital. So a lot of the rotation will be more toward operations, the distribution side of the pharmacy, how our technicians work. And I think it's a great introductions to, if you're not a technician, or if you are in the community, it's different compared to the hospital. So I think for all pharmacists to know what our technicians do day in, day out is crucial, because to be a great pharmacist, you have to be a really good technician, or at least understand the workflow really well. But like you said, there's some other sites that will also give you kind of a dabble into other clinical areas like ED and ICU. You can shadow their clinical pharmacist for a few days. Those are always good. In addition to what I do for my IPPE students is that if they haven't ever seen like a surgery, I would try to arrange like for them to see a surgery. It doesn't have to be a long surgery, but CAPPE is literally a whole day. But there are some like shorter surgeries for 2-3 hours or 4 hours. So I would actually arrange them to see surgery, because honestly, when you're working as a pharmacist, it's almost rare for you to really go into the operating room and witness surgery cases. Like, you work in the OR, but you don't necessarily see surgery. So as a student, I think one of the pearl would take away is try to ask to observe and see as many things as possible, of course, inside the pharmacy, but outside of the pharmacy, working with like social worker, quality team, go see surgery. I mean, just anything else that pertain to patient care that you may not see day in, day out, like PT or physical therapy, for example, because all of these service lines end up being an integral part of patient care. So with your experience in IPPE and APPE, with IPPE, what are 3 things that you would recommend for students who are starting the IPPE rotation to be prepared?
To prepare. First, so before you're starting your IPPEs, and the best way to prepare, one is to ask like upperclassmen who have gone through that IPPE, or even if it isn't that specific IPPE site, just to ask them what their experience was. That way you are like able to understand what that specific preceptor is expecting out of you, or that you know what to expect within that hospital system. That's one tip. And then the second tip I would give is, I think, brush up on like the top 200 drugs, just because you'll be seeing a lot of it in the hospital, or even just like any injectable drugs too, because that's things that you're going to see in the hospital and you'll see with certain patient cases. So that way you will understand like what's going on with the patient, and don't be afraid to ask the pharmacist whenever you're shadowing them in the central pharmacy what the patient is going through, or if they know what's going on with the patient, so you can learn a little bit more about that patient's case versus just sitting in and shadowing the pharmacist, verify orders or anything like that. And or like even whenever it deals with like operations and ordering drugs, that way you can really feel immersed in what you're learning. And the third tip I would give is, so I think, yeah, that's mostly what I did is I asked upperclassmen about how to prepare for the IPPE rotation. And then I also studied up on lectures, and I studied up mostly drug cards. That way, whenever I do go to the central pharmacy, I wasn't completely lost, or I wasn't confused whenever they showed me different prescriptions they were verifying. And then something that you might be able to do is you might be able to work in the compounding area. So I would also look at like old material on that, just to make sure you remember all the sterile lab procedures and everything like that.
True. Yeah, and be able to know how, when you garp into like an IV room and what that looks like, and observing. And there's some sites that will actually let you work on like expiry drugs, just so you can test out your skill set. So that would be good. One last tip I want to leave with you guys is, as you're preparing for IPPE rotation, think about this, really observe and think about the site. Is this a possible site that you want to do your APPE rotation? And are these the preceptors that you feel like that you will learn a lot? And if that's the case, make sure you make the connections and really talk to the preceptors you're interested in, or even like the managers or directors. Say, hey, I really enjoy my time here. I would like to come back for my P4 rotation. Like, what should I do? Those are all good building connections and relationship to prepare you for your P4 rotations. So I know, Jennifer, you are garbing up and preparing to be a P4 and getting APPE rotations line up. What is one thing that you have learned through this process? And I know you're interested in residency. One tip that you can provide to the students who are watching this on getting APPE rotations line up.
So the best way, or the best tip that I've gotten from upperclassmen and even from professors, is to try to get your APPE rotations that deal with residency or deal with clinical rotations at the front. Try to front load that, so that way whenever mid-year hits, you'd be able to, or whenever applications hit, you could use those first few rotations to have as letters of rec, because for residencies they require about 2 to 3 letters of recommendation. So if you can get at least 3 or 4 rotations, which is your first 3 or 4 APPEs before applications are due, as like clinical rotations that can speak on your behalf, that's what a lot of upperclassmen are recommending for me.
And I have to agree with that if you're interested in residency, lining up at least 2 to 3 clinical rotations, internal medicine, the basic that are required. And then if you're interested in ICU or transplant, just more clinical rotation type, or be in the hospital-based types, just because, one, you get to explore the hospitals. If they have residency program, you can build connection. 2, you can start getting to know your preceptors and start asking for, building good relationship and asking for good letter of recommendations. And third, as you are in the hospital, you get to network with, if again they have residency program, you get to network with the residents, which are the ones that will decide who come next. So it's a sphere of influence.
Yes.
All right. Well, we are going to close up. So what question do you have for me, Jennifer, that you would like me to share with the team?
So my questions for you is, how do I stand out to my preceptor whenever I'm going into my rotations, and how do I ask them for a letter of recommendation?
So first of all, you really have, I really like that you have to, go above and beyond. And what does that mean? It's different for every preceptor, but when you meet with them that first week, first day, whatever, for the orientation, just ask them, oh, what are your expectations of me? And then, whatever they expect of you, go 3, 4, 5 steps above that. So if they expect you to show up at 6 a.m. or expect you to work 10 patients by the end of your third week, make sure by the third week you can work up to 20 patients. So really trying to step up the game. If they expect you to do 1 journal club, go ahead and see you can do 2 journal club. So really going above and beyond in terms of, because school has like minimum requirements on what's needed for like required rotation for like internal medicine. Really try to invest as much as possible. What I tell my students is that it's really up to you. Your preceptor is going to work hard to help you learn, but that preceptor won't work harder than you. So you have to work harder than the preceptor to really get the best experience for your rotation. And all the preceptors know when they're a good student or they have a good student versus not, because those are motivated, that want to learn, that take on projects. Ask for research projects, ask to be on a quality improvement project. So there's always more work to be done at the hospital to help improve patient care. And those are a few things I would say that you can step up and go above and beyond. And when one last tip is that when a preceptor asks you a question, you want to answer not just A, you want to go A, B, C, and D. Like, keep asking yourself the reason why. Oh, why this? Okay, why is that? Okay, why? So until you ask yourself 5 whys, you're really going to get to the root of the problem. And the preceptor may stop at the second why, but if he or she end up asking you more questions, you like come up with preparation and they'll be very impressed. I learned this the hard way because when I was doing my ICU rotation at MD Anderson, my preceptor, who's an excellent, smartest man I've known when it comes to ICU, and he would ask me, oh, why this? And I would come back and give him just that one. And he's like, okay, so why that? I'm like, oh, okay. So literally we do this about 2 or 3 times. It's like, okay, now I know like what I needed to do. So those are all like, one, make sure you go above and beyond the expectations and really show that you're interested, motivated, come early, stay late, do whatever you need to do to take care of patients. And then at the end of the rotation, they know how you are. Ask them, don't ask people just for a letter of rec. You want to ask, can you write me a great letter of rec or a good letter of rec, right? And if someone, as a preceptor who doesn't know you, they should be okay saying, no, I don't know, or if they know you really well, they're like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've done X, Y, Z. And one last tip that I would share is that throughout your rotation, you should record, kind of like reflect on your rotations, like accomplishment, what journal club you have done, how many patient interaction you have had, how many patients you've educated, how many anti-coag that you intervene. I mean, just list out as many actionable interventions or things that you have done, because in the end that will help you with your memories. But then when the preceptor agrees to write you the letter, you can say, hey, these are things that I have done. It maybe that'll help you with the letter of rec. And trust me, we will really appreciate that.
Okay.
Those are really good questions. So that is kind of a close up for us. I hope this has been helpful to you. For those that are new, please subscribe and comment. Make sure you hit subscribe and the bell button so you will see more new videos that will be helpful to you. Until next time, ciao.
Bye.